This is the National Day of Resistance. There are people marching on Washington. The moms of young boys who have been murdered are in Washington with thousands of supporters. We've got Walmart people going out on strike. You know, we've got fast food workers going out on strike. We've got people who are undocumented coming out into the streets, identifying themselves and saying, this is about human rights. You know, we are about human rights. So this is happening all over the country. And here we are talking about water. And what does water have to do with any of this? Obviously, it has everything to do with this. And one of the things that we want to do today is to unpack those relationships between what's happening in Washington, what's happening down on the border, what's happening in Chicago. We're going to hear a little bit about more about what's happening in Michigan. We're going to unpack all of that, and we're going to figure out how we can be part not of a tiny little movement, but of a big movement for fundamental social change. And in that process, we will invoke the internationally recognized human rights. After the Second World War, the sentiment was, this can never happen again. And one of the ways that we need to ensure that these atrocities can never happen again is to create, through the United Nations, a document that would have the force of international law that spells out the rights that people have simply by being human. Right after the Second World War, one of the things that global leaders wanted to do was to rebuild economies. And the Declaration of Human Rights, which people could begin to invoke, was something that the world could, quote, afford at that time, all right? We were rebuilding industries all over the world. So this document had the support of global leaders, including captains of industry, right? Something has changed between then and now. At that time, it made a lot of sense for the corporate elite and politicians to support that because it was necessary for their well-being to get money into the hands of people and get people feeling good and optimistic and spending and all of that, okay? But something has happened between then and now. And probably the biggest thing that happened is something that resulted in the corporate elite abandoning this effort to get money and optimism into the hands of you and me, the so-called common people, okay? But the important thing to understand is that in the 1970s, we ended the industrial age and opened the electronic age. That shift in the economic base is as big as the shift from feudalism to the industrial age. That's where we are right now. And everything has changed. One of the biggest things that has changed is exactly that motivation that underpinned the support by the corporate elites for human rights. But I want to ask you to keep in mind, as we listen to these presentations today, that everything that you will hear is based on a fundamental change that has happened in the world, which means that we are going to have to move forward in a fundamentally different way. So let me very briefly introduce the panels. Immediately to my left, we have Dustin White from the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, OVEC. Dustin, I understand, is an 11th generation Appalachian person struggling for human rights, whatever they're called, dignity and rights. We have Paul Corbett Brown to his left. Paul is the president of the Keepers of the Mountain, and I'm sure you all in West Virginia know about the importance of the mountains in this area. They are probably emblematic of West Virginia, and we will understand why they are being destroyed and what we have to do to keep them. Then, moving along the table here, we've got our guests from Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. We have Maureen Taylor, the president of Michigan Rights. We have Tijuana, who is coming to us from Highland Park, where the... Detroit, I'm sorry. Not Highland Park? Okay, that's a bit further down the road. Okay. And Tijuana is going to be talking about some of the background that's happened in Detroit that will help us understand, actually all of these people will help us understand what West Virginia and Detroit have to do with each other, okay? Sylvia Orduño, also from Michigan Welfare Rights, will help us understand the connections between the right to water and the right to housing, both of which are being simultaneously attacked and undermined. And Marion Kramer. Marion Kramer is so many things. One of the things that she is the co-chair of the Assembly to End Poverty, which is, not surprisingly, based in the same office as the Michigan Welfare Rights. Marianne is the co-founder of and president of the National Organization for Welfare Rights. In the audience, people from Massachusetts. We got people from New York. We got people from Virginia. We got people from West Virginia. I'm from Tennessee. And yes, my county is Appalachia. Okay. Finally, we have on Skype, that's not you, Nancy, where are you? That's your husband. Okay.
I lost you.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get you back. There she is. Okay.
That's you.
Nancy Price comes to us from the Women's International. That's Nancy's husband. Comes to us from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. She was very instrumental in a coalition, putting together and working with a coalition that got the Right to Water bill passed in California. So she's going to be talking about how we might use that example as we move forward. Okay, two other people that are extremely important here. Well, three, okay. We've got the Dortch family here. Over here we have Evelyn, who is the president of DOG. Okay, her daughter Beth, and Cheyenne, and these people have done a Herculean job to put this day together.
Well, they handed it off to me to kick this off, so welcome to West Virginia for those of you who traveled here, and we're grateful to have everyone here. This is a place that I care very much about. My name is Dustin White. I am a community organizer with the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, or OVEC for short. And I have been fighting, I would want to say, extreme extraction and its impacts to water quality and human health here in the region for probably now about 6 years. And growing up, I grew up actually about, I don't know, probably about 3 hours south of here in Boone County, West Virginia, heart of what they like to call the coal fields. Grew up basically in a holler. Well, I'm a holler boy, so I'm quite proud of that. And my mother's in the room. She can attest that as a kid, I took to water quite quickly, playing in the stream that ran beside our home, probably even before I could walk. And so water has been a very big part of my life for my 31 years. Something that we have an anniversary coming up here soon in January, and that is the January 9th, 2014 MCHM chemical spill that left over 300,000 citizens here in West Virginia without usable water for months. You know, a lot of people think this only lasted for weeks. The truth is, this is actually still going on. There are people in cities like Charleston who are still afraid to use their water. And the day that that happened, I happened to be in Beckley, West Virginia, which was outside this water system that was impacted. all day at the Veterans Hospital in Beckley with my father, who in October had been diagnosed with cancer. And that day, we had met with his oncologist and found out that there wasn't much treatment for his illness. So after learning this news, we make the long hour drive back to his residence, and he had just underwent major surgery in December to try to have the cancer removed, and it ultimately ended in failure. They could not remove it. And my father was pretty much bedfast. So after we get back to his home, we start to work on trying to clean him up because he was in a lot of pain and it was a rough trip to get to the hospital. And right as we were running the water, a family friend came in and said, "Don't use the water. There's been a chemical spill."
Oh.
So immediately I get online, and I've been an organizer with OVEC for almost a year by then, so I was quite used to emergency situations, that can happen around here in West Virginia when it comes to slurry spills and other chemical spills. Like just a couple of months before the MCHM spill, there was another chemical spill that most people never heard about. That was a chemical called DT50D that turned an entire river white for miles in Boone County, my home county. So things like this happen on a regular basis in this state, and actually throughout the region in Appalachia with coal slurry spills and things like that. So immediately I was activated as an organizer in the midst of trying to take care of my terminally ill father, organizing responses for folks on the ground who currently did not have water, and I'm trying to keep everything abbreviated because I could probably speak for hours on end about everything that happened, but we, and I say we as a lot of the grassroots organizations here inside the states, who are often called hippies and tree huggers, were some of the first emergency response in communities in West Virginia that was impacted. And it took us, the people who work in these communities, who knew the people, to actually deliver the aid. And we had donations coming in from out of state, and we were organizing even to the point that the National Guard started contacting us to find out where to deliver water and how. Which really brings us to the highlight of the issue, and my friend Paul here will go a little bit more about the extraction, because West Virginia and Central Appalachia is basically a resource colony for much of the United States. But ultimately here in West Virginia, this is a state that was designed to cater to industry. We have some of the best politicians money can buy, and I don't say that lightly. And this is a systemic problem here in this state that we see that the failure is actually at our state government. We have politicians that will pretty much laugh you out of the office when you show up with water like this here in front of me and say that this is a person's water. This water right here came from my father's home on January 28th, days after they said that the water was, they never used the word safe, and still to this day they have never said that our water is safe to use. It's appropriate to use is the word that they use. But this came from my father's home after they said it was appropriate to use. And remember, my father is bedfast, underwent major surgery, and is dying of cancer. So when I showed up the next day at the state capitol with a sample of this water to try to show our state legislatures, they threatened to arrest me. My father, a Vietnam veteran and a retired coal miner, wasn't even 10 years into his retirement, spent the last weeks of his life without access to clean water. We had to melt snow and boil creek water to keep my father clean. No one should have to go through that.
That's right.
But the chemical spill happened from a chemical holding facility that used this chemical that was used to clean coal after it's processed, just upstream of a public service water intake for over 300,000 people. And we're temporarily in the national media with this chemical spill and everything. But the one thing that nobody in the national media ever asked is why were so many people on one water intake? And that's because most of the waterways in this state are already compromised. And to give you a little bit of a brief history of the Appalachian region, especially here in West Virginia, our first economy was built on our water. Our water was once so pure that aristocrats would pay to drink it. We have probably more rivers and streams than any other state in the Union here, and the majority of them have been compromised by extractive industries. And with that, I'll...
You know, when you think about this, what's in this bottle, I mean, it's sacred. I mean, our bodies, if you could squeeze every drop of water that's in my body out of me, I would be reduced to probably a double handful of meaningless dust. And that's true of every single human being on this planet. I mean, there's nothing that binds us together more than this. And we cannot be who we are. We cannot be living, breathing, sentient beings with water that looks like this. Just can't happen. It just can't. No one should have to live with water like that, and no one should have to leave this earth with that as their water. It's just not right. So I'm going to tell you a cautionary tale and ask you a question. I want to know if anybody in here can tell me what 6 million Jews in Germany, 500 mountains in Appalachia, handful of traffic cops in any podunk town in southern West Virginia, and Eric Garner's death have in common. One thing they really have in common is that in every single one of those cases, the citizenry relinquished control to the government. 6 million Jews were murdered in Germany because an entire nation was too cowardice or too racist to stand up to Hitler and say, no, we're not going to participate in this. Traffic cops in any small town will knock you off for 26 miles an hour and give you a $200 ticket. Why? Because you're really a law-breaking person and you deserve to be fined? Really? No, because they can get away with it because we don't fight them. Eric Garner laid dead in the streets. How many people saw that video? Did anybody see that video? You know, what really blows my mind about that video is that so many people in this country saw that. And I'm not sure if yet, collectively as a nation, we have woken up to the realization that that was not Hollywood. We collectively, as a nation, witnessed a man being murdered on the streets in broad daylight. An unarmed civilian, surrounded by cops with bulletproof vests and weapons on their hips. An unarmed civilian murdered in the streets. That was not Hollywood. You know, the cameras didn't turn off a few minutes later and everybody got up and dusted themselves off and said, good job, let's go get something to eat. That was one of us. Now, you know, before we turn this into the citizens versus the cops, the truth is there's a lot of good police officers out there that care about keeping the order in this country, and they do believe that their role is to protect and serve. I have a very dear friend who's a police officer, small town police officer actually, and he's a good guy. But there needs to be some accountability for this. And when there is murder after murder after murder, and these police officers are not held accountable, and our judicial system refuses to hold them accountable, there's a problem. And what does that have to do with the water in Appalachia? Those 500 mountains that I said, what does that have to do with 600 Jews being murdered in Germany? Those 500 mountains have been also assassinated in this state, and in the process of doing that, they have polluted our water. 3/4 of this water in West Virginia is not fit to swim in. 3/4 of the water in West Virginia is not fit to swim in. If you buy a fishing license here, it will tell you you can only eat one fish a month from the waters. Why? Because we're trying to build up the fish population? No. You go through southern West Virginia and all along the streams, you'll see little signs, catch and release, catch and release. I had friends come up this summer and say, what's the catch and release all about? Y'all's trout population down? Nope. Trout population's fine. You can't eat the fish because they're full of heavy metals from the mining. That's a problem. It's not just an aesthetic thing. When they blow up these mountains and destroy these ecosystems, they are destroying the life support system for human beings. And now, 28 peer-reviewed scientific studies later, 28 peer-reviewed studies later, dust from mountaintop removal sites not correlates to, not represents a connection to, not might have something to do with, dust from mountaintop removal sites causes lung cancer in human tissue. 28 studies later. How many studies will it take before we accept that this industry is wholesale murdering people? Because one of those 28 studies says that every year 4,000 additional deaths happen in Appalachia. And then these places that they like to call the coal fields of West Virginia, the life expectancy is 15 to 20 years less than anywhere else in the United States, any demographic. 15 to 20 years shorter than anywhere else in the United States.
I'm middle-aged for southern West Virginia at 31.
And when you look at that and you think, wow, my dad's now 72 and has black lung. He can't walk from here to the other side of this room without losing his breath. And what's he going to get for that? Pat on the back? Oh, good old Joe Manchin's going to say, way to go, Mr. Brown, you're a national hero. You've powered this nation and done us proud. Well, screw you, Joe Manchin. You know, I want my dad back. You're going to give him a Purple Heart for his black lung? I mean, really. I'm tired of all this nonsense about what heroes people are because we've suffered and died for somebody's wealth. Let's just be real about what's going on here. Because for 9 years, I've lived off the grid completely. Why? To show you how green I am because I want a big award? No, because I want you to be inspired to know what's possible. Because everybody says, we can't live off the grid in West Virginia. Yeah, we can, because I do. For 9 years, every bit of my electricity's come from the sun. It's possible. So don't tell me that we have to have national heroes die in the coal industry and we have to have our communities poisoned with their water and their soil and their air being destroyed forever for the greed of the coal industry. Don't tell me we have to do that, because we don't. We don't have to have it. It's unnecessary. Our struggle in Appalachia is really no different than what's happening for Maureen and her friends in Detroit. And it's really no different than those folks down on the, whatever this thing called a border is. You know, Mexico, the Mexico-U.S. line. I mean, do somehow people stop being human beings when you get south of that line in the sand? Does the Rio Grande somehow transmutate you into another form of creature that walks on two legs but is no longer human? You don't deserve human rights anymore because you live below that line? I mean, come on, folks, let's get real. These things are all related. And what they all come down to is that the government no longer upholds the Constitution of this nation, and the government is no longer run by the people of this country. The government in this country is run by corporations.
That's right.
They don't do our bidding. They do what Monsanto says. They do what Arch Minerals says. They do what Alpha Natural Resources says. You know, they don't do what we say. Just this morning, West Virginia National Public Radio does a story about how the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection admits that the coal companies do their own reporting about their water quality. And a man testified under oath that he had falsified documents, and the DEP says, well, yeah, we don't really have anything in place to stop that. What do you want us to do about it? Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, the government ought to be here to protect us. I don't need a government telling me everything I need to do. I know how to be an ethical person. I know how to treat the people in this room and treat other people with respect. I don't need the government to be my moral watchdog. What I need the government to do is protect my human rights and protect your human rights and protect Eric Garner's human rights. How about a national strike? How about not a day of resistance? How about a week or a month or a year of it? How about we just stop the whole machine? You know, there was a Declaration of Independence. What happened to that? At times, it might become necessary when a government becomes unresponsive to replace that government. Or restore it. I'm thinking it's beyond restoration at this point. You know, I've restored a few old houses in my day, and I'll tell you, there's times when you realize, buddy, the best thing you can do with them is just tear it down and build a new one. Thank you.
On the 10th of December, 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted and proclaimed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the full text of which appears in the following pages. I always carry a copy of this document because I thought that, and I always think that the writing is so special. There's a copy of it on the wall back here, Article 25, that says everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of that person and the family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment or sickness or disability or widowhood or old age or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond that person's control. I bring you greetings from Michigan Welfare Rights. Always a pleasure to go to places where there are like-minded people, and that's always a joy for me. There's something about turning water off where low-income people live that struck the heart of folks. There's something funny about this, something extremely odd. You know, this is not about people just trying to be mean. This is not about somebody waking up in the morning and saying, you know, I think what I'm going to do is just turn water off because I just feel like it. This is much more of an intricate and an involved situation. In Detroit, surrounding areas, we used to have things called Dodge Main, Huber Avenue Foundry, Lynch Road Assembly, Cadillac Fleetwood, General Motors. We had all of those factories, Max Stamping, Eldon Gear and Axle Plant. We had 400,000 workers that were either directly or almost directly tied to automobile manufacturing. And of those factories, almost all of them are gone. There is a Ford Rouge Assembly. At one time, Ford Rouge Assembly had a little bit more than 100,000 workers working in multiple plants that were connected. Ford Rouge Assembly, that complex still exists today, and it's just under 9,000 workers. 100,000, 9,000. 100,000, 9,000. And they're making 3 and 4 times as many cars. If you have not seen a factory run by R2-D2, run by robots, come to Detroit. We will take you on a tour where you can go in and you can see the arm pick up the chassis and move it over here. The chassis is picked up and taken to the paint, and the paint arm picks it up and takes it to the buffing, and the buffing takes it to the shining, and the shining takes it to where it gets the wheels, and something else drives it out, and there's a lady that toots the horn to make certain it works. And between the first arm and toot, nobody's in the plant. This is an epical change. They don't need us to work anymore. We say it again. They do not need us to work anymore. Let me say this one more time, because at first, you know, that doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. It applies to you. They don't need us to work anymore. Now, if that is a given reality, now we have to think, dang, they don't need me to work anymore. And I'm used to working. I get a paycheck, I go spend it, I run out of money, I go back to work, put some more hours in, I get a paycheck, run out of money, I go back. That's what I do. Now, if they don't need you to work anymore, and that's the paradigm, that's the cycle under which you manage, you're in a hell of a bind. You're in some trouble, because things have now changed. Anybody that has ever had a job and you get laid off and you have to go on unemployment, the first thing you notice is that it takes 2, 3, 4 weeks for it to start. And then once it starts, it's nowhere near the amount of money you were earning when you were working. So, you know, there's something funny about the way this system of capitalism works. You know, if you get disabled at a job, you injure yourself. Take 2 or 3 months before your benefits start, and it's nowhere near the kind of money that you need in order to manage your lives. And now we have a situation in Detroit where in February and March, all the scenarios that I've described, we got massive layoffs, massive shutdown of factories, massive exodus of people. We used to have 1.5, 1.6, and 1.7 million. And people began to leave my city, leave my state, because employment just left. So people had to go away. You can't put the house on your back. You have to just leave it and go someplace and start. So now we have just under 800,000 people. From a high 1.6, 1.7, now we got half of those many folks in the city of Detroit decided, you know, we've got to make this water situation work. So what we're going to do is punish those people that are still left. And we're going to make you all pay 2, 3, and 4 times the amount for money. Now, it's an outrage to have people living in a home on their deathbed and transition and not have water. This happens because, well, we're waiting for somebody else to fix it. And still, we got a problem. It might be that the people that need to fix it are you. It might be that the people that need to manage what the solution is are the people that are sitting in these rooms.
That's right.
At the churches where we go to. It might be that just regular people are the ones that finally will be able to take the courage and step forward and say, look, not another day, not another day. February will be the 1-year anniversary of the shutoffs of water in the city of Detroit. So far, it's about 19,000 that don't have water right now, and that was Friday when I left. I don't know how many it is today. They're cutting water off at a clip of 300 to 400 every day. And if you illegally, without authorization, find a way to turn your water back on, that makes you ineligible for help from any of the other agencies. So you have to stay with your water off. There's a fine to reconnect it, and then there's a fine because you did connect it illegally. I'm telling you, my sisters and brothers, we don't have to live like this. We got enough water, we've got enough houses, we got enough trees, it's clear to me, all of the things that we need, we have. The enemy is this group of people, these corporations, that have made their minds up that our lives are not important. I bring you greetings once again from Michigan Welfare Rights, and let you know that it's such a pleasure and a humbling moment to be sitting with you, and whatever kind of courage and fortitude and support that we can provide, even though we're under attack, we have more than enough to share with you. If you get tired of living here, got plenty of houses in Detroit. Come on, and we'll show you how to break into them, and you can stay with us long.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tawana Morris, and I am a licensed investigator. I'm a retired Detroit police officer and a survivor of police brutality. And in the 90s, that's what brought me to Michigan Welfare Rights in the 90s. And we, right now, the pensioners are going through some really drastic situations up under this emergency manager, which was given to us by Rick Snyder. I don't want to say another thing, but Governor Rick Snyder. But what I'm talking about today has to deal with Reverend Pickney, and is also in this struggle. And Reverend Pickney is from Brennan County in Benton Harbor. And their mayor was corrupt. And Reverend Pickney is a avid fighter for justice. And what happened was, Reverend Pickney was found guilty with no evidence. He called me and I come down there and I did the investigation. I talked to all of the witnesses. Everyone confirmed their signature. Okay, they had this is an attack. This is Reverend Pickney's words. This is an attack, well, with the intent to stop the community's recall of the election going forward. Okay, all right. I also want to address the situation about the jury. How could the jury find him guilty? And that if my theory is right, the prosecutor made the comment to the jurors, you can prosecute without any evidence. The all-white jury was not a jury of his peers. Okay? Now, that people don't know, but that's another reason to have that case retried. You have to have, there are laws, the MCL laws, that state that you have to have a jury of your peers. The situation was so, and the thing is, Brennan County is ran by Whirlpool. Whirlpool is a multi-billion corporation. It is. Okay? And he's fighting the system. Reverend Pickney has been in jail about 3 times. And these offenses are normally misdemeanor offenses. They're trying to use the ruling, the Michigan ruling, 3 times you out. And then, and that's how they're able to bring him up on charges for felonies. These are misdemeanor charges, but they're trying to give this man a lifetime in prison. Lifetime in prison. And it's nothing but corporate America.
That's right.
You have, and like Maureen said, you gotta have no fear. You gotta be willing to stand up and fight. And Reverend Pickney's final words and his quote: "Democracy has been stolen from the people. Water rights have been stolen. Poverty is growing. We, the people, have nothing in common with the billionaires, their corporations, and their government. We must stand together, people. We must stand together and fight. And in my words, we need a federal investigation from Washington, D.C., and we need to unite and fight to reform our justice system." Thank you.
I'm Marion Kramer, and I'm also from Michigan, but I'm from the capital of Detroit, Highland Park, Michigan.
All right.
I'd say that because Highland Park sits in the middle of Detroit, and it's the city where Henry Ford built a water system for the purpose of not just, not for the people so much, but to make sure that his factory, his assembly line, was able to run. And that factory, that pumping station has lasted for years, until 3 years ago, when the water was transferred for delivery to Detroit by a mayor that works really for the governor. Highland Park was one of the cities that received some of those first, it was the emergency financial manager. Then it went to the emergency manager. And it's still now the emergency, but each step of the way, they tighten up their areas of responsibility and what rights that they have in order to rule us. Each step of the way, you could trace it that it was moving more and more towards fascism. You couldn't tell people in the city that you're gonna lose your democratic rights. You couldn't tell, we used to go before the city council of Detroit, when we were fighting around water, and say, this is not right, this is not democratically right, and you couldn't tell people that they would deny us our right. You go before Highland Park, you go before Benton Harbor, you go before all these areas that were facing the possibility of emergency managers coming in and those that had it, and say, look, this is a slap in our face. And they are gonna be able to take from us. And it's right, if you go online and look at Public Act 4, Public Act 72 that ushered it on into, you will see that they have the ability to deny you the right to participate in electoral politics. They have the right to take the property of the city and sell it off to be able to take care of your quote-unquote financial situation. They have the right to fire council people, to fire the mayor, and even they reduced Highland Park mayor one time to doing nothing at council meeting but announcing who's dead, who got married, who received awards, and whatever. They do not believe that because we have been sold a bill of goods for years that we have a constitution that's supposed to protect our rights. That constitution is being changed every day.
That's right.
Under this emergency manager situation. You've heard a similar situation where, in particular in Benton Harbor, Detroit, and what have you, as they go in one door and say, we're gonna, under this bankruptcy of Detroit, we're gonna tax the pensions, which was constitutionally protected, that they could not do that to public employees. They were in the other door in the federal government saying that we don't recognize that because we don't have a law on the federal level to protect them. So, you know, they have ways to change things without us, Joe public, ever even knowing anything about it. And when you tell people that up front, it's hard for them to really sink that in. I know we've gone around the country showing the waterfront when we fought diligently in Detroit and Highland Park to stop Highland Park from becoming privatized. We won that. But at the same time, they've been coming straight into the back door because as the emergency manager left Highland Park, we didn't know that, a lot of us did not know that we were still under the hands of the government, the state government. Because they had a so-called advisor in Highland Park that was really advising the governor, the city council and the mayor on certain things in relationship to finance. They were really still pulling the tag. So what does that mean for places like even with Reverend Pinckney? Reverend Pinckney represents the face of the movement. So if they can get rid of Reverend Pinckney, that means they're coming for the rest of us.
That's right.
Because what we are defending is our rights to be able to have water and our basic democratic rights.
That's right.
To be able to, everything else that we have faced out here. Water is today's gold and people don't realize that. Not only is it today's gold, try living without it for 3 days and see what happens. Now, you know, you remember when they transferred that $13 trillion to bail out the corporations? That was the largest, one of the largest transfer of wealth in human history, right? And at that time, the corporations were planning for years to still make sure that they were a part of the government. Well, now they run the government. They run the government because why would they even let stuff like going down in Detroit be done? Or in Highland Park? Why would they let that happen? We have not been billed in Highland Park for water in 4 years almost. They just started a year ago. And I received a bill at my house, my husband and I, for $1,500 or something like that. For a few months and what have you. The next one, it goes up, it's up to, the last one I received was $3,000. Well, we decided now, hell with you. we're not gonna pay it because you don't have no way that you can give us a adequate bill, because you estimating everything. At the same time, we don't know where this money is going because our system, when it comes to the water, is decaying and you're not doing nothing about it. Well, we had fought and got money from the state that usually would go to the Fed to be able to try to get our pumping station taken care of. The workers that they hired said we needed to transfer that water at least for 4 days, the pumping part of it, to Detroit, where we could fix this hole in the reservoir. Now that hole been in the reservoir for years, but the workers that used to work over, they knew how to get around that hole. But these workers did not, and they flooded the community one day. Who had to pay for that? We did. Those 4 days have turned to almost 4 years. So we receive water now from Detroit. And a lot of us are paying into an escrow account to make sure until we get a concrete solution to this problem, we're not gonna pay you. So we offer that as a solution to folks, that let people pay into an escrow account and let that escrow account keep, and what you figure out in that escrow account is how much would you be on for 3 months, every month, as far as your usage for that water. And then you turn around and let your attorney send something to the city, said, we are representing all these people. And we're using an escrow account where they are paying into this. And we'd be gladly and able to release this money once a valid situation comes about that both parties can agree to. That's where we are. Now, is that gonna continue, and then is it gonna continue to work? No, well, yes and no. But only you understand that what is happening in Michigan is, that's why emergency managers are key to this government. What they cannot get, if people take an action, they go in the back door and get the law changed to make sure that that emergency manager can go in and take anything they want for the benefit of the financial situation that we're facing. So what we're looking at here in Michigan is creeping fascism. If you don't know what fascism is, it's time for you to begin to study and learn. I'm not talking about fascism in Germany, because they needed fascism to expand. I'm talking about just what Maureen had talked about earlier. There's a different way that we are producing in this country, and they don't need all of us to be a part of it no more. And if we don't understand the economic base for this, then our strategy and tactics on how we're gonna move out here is gonna be messed up. It's not yeah, they use black versus white, because a lot of the places that they have gone to have been majority or somewhat, the African American or black, whatever we call ourselves at times, are the ones that are the majority in a lot of these areas. They use us, that section of the working class, to be able to knock everybody else into place. We have to understand these tricks of the capitalists and the people that represent their interests. Because just to get out and say, oh, this is a black problem, this is a woman problem, this is a child problem, it's all those problems. Because one day we're not going to be able to have water. And this is, and I know we have to have it because we're in the, but see, this, in Michigan alone, Nestle's was able to get a certificate, what was it? Permit for $87. $87. They got thrown out of Philadelphia, out of Pittsburgh, and places, and for pumping water. But they came right to Michigan, and a governor that we supported her no good, pimple face behind
Democrat.
to get in, and she met with us, and we said that we're not gonna support you, and support you, because at that time Reverend Pinckney was facing the possibility to go into prison at that time. We said, we're not gonna support you until you take a stand to free Reverend Pigney. But she had us cronies, some of these, pimps in the pulpit, and, getting money on the face-base thing to be able to fight Reverend Pigney and all of it. We had a 10-point program. She said, yes, yes, yes. Am I right? She said, yes. As soon as she got in there, it was yes,
No,
yes,
no, no.
yes to the corporation and the hell with us. So all I'm saying, know your enemy, know who what you're fighting about, and at each step of the way, it might not be 1,000 people in here, but we represent more than 1,000.
That's right.
That we have to understand what is the next hill we have to take and why. How long it's gonna take and why. Right now in Detroit, I'm a part of the Humrich 9. What did we do? We innocent. We're just as innocent as we can be, because we took a stand, not just us, everybody that was out there, to stop Detroit from being able to turn water off through a private company. And they're claiming that we were stopping them from turning the water on. But we got arrested. We were arrested for this. So if they can get away with making sure that this stick with us, that's another situation. They say, well, you know, it's a misdemeanor, and that's 90 days in the jail. You put me in 90 days in the jail, I'm gonna get arrested for one thing, and the second thing, I'm gonna be educating, and they're gonna, when the prisoners come out, they're gonna be trying to help us to organize. But at the same time, we got to educate wherever we are.
Right.
We got to make sure people know about the mountaintops, everything, for the benefit of the next generation. But one other solution, and I'm through. We're not only looking at the question of how this fascism is moving in, because we don't have no investigation by DC coming into Detroit, coming into places. Because if they had cared about us, they would have their butts there a long time ago. Paul and all of them wouldn't have to get on the highway and bring all those waters and have my back hurt for a week trying to get that water off that truck. Boy, that's not an easy job. And just think they had to pack it and then have to unpack it when they got there. Water is precious to us. We're looking at the possibility of privatization versus nationalization. We want water nationalized. It's a public entity, and it has to stay there. And we have to nationalize where we can even help in California where drought. Well, California got quite a bit of water these days. But at the same time, we have to look at this for the benefit of the public and not for the benefit of Wall Street.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what we got to be about.
Exactly.
But I tell you, if you do that, you'll create more jobs.
Yep.
We have better water. And, you know, and the corporations would not be running our water system. So it's things that we bring to y'all from our concrete situation. But we're open for other examples and answers to how we're gonna get out of this situation. And I think that we're gonna be successful. I might not live to see it, but I'd be damned, I'm gonna fight going out and kicking butts all the way.
If it sounds like we've resorted to name calling, it's true. In fact, we're holding our tongues here today. But you get to the point when you're like, you know, you get tired of just being decent, you get tired of being nice, right? And these corporation tricks, you know, they come in and just changed up everything. And it's not to say that life was so perfect, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. We know what this country's history's been like. But these corporations have just really ratcheted it up. So a lot of what you're hearing here is true. And I appreciate, Justin, you talking about how Appalachian folks are really here living like under a colony with these corporations. In some ways, that's really what it feels like also in Michigan. You know, we're surrounded by this resource that's so rich with water. You know, everyone likes to do the mitten thing, and this is where I live, and you know, but the whole thing is that we're surrounded by water. And so again, corporations have had their eye on this for a while and trying to figure out how they can get in there. And the way they've decided they're gonna do it is to keep undercutting us. So Maureen is right, that a lot of the basis for this is about us not even being able to just have the basics that we need in order to be able to survive. And for at least the kind of system we live under, you've gotta have a job, right? You've gotta have a way to be able to pay for things, because that's how they determine what you get and what you don't. And as jobs are not there, and employment is high, and poverty is even higher, then they start looking at, all right, well, if you can't pay for, you know, some of these basics, then there's no need for you to even be around. And that's what this has come down to. There's no need for us to take up space. And part of that is if you don't need to be here, you don't need to have water, you don't need to have an education, you don't need to have this place to live. And so this is how we start seeing these attacks, not only at some of these bigger levels that we know of, but the attacks that start getting into our neighborhoods. And so this water fight is one of these things that we've seen that's actually started hitting neighborhoods in a different way than people have understood before. So one of the reasons that some of these water bills have been so high in Detroit too, is because they've started attaching the water bill onto your property taxes. If you haven't been able to keep up with the water bill, and we've seen bills as high as, I think, what, $20,000, $25,000, not even understanding how it could get that high. But if your bill is high enough to the point where you really can't get any help from social services, or it just, you don't have the income to be able to even manage a payment plan, they'll transfer it onto your tax note for the county, and then they'll figure, well, now you've got to deal with the county for that part of the bill. So then you get your new water bills, but it just accumulates. After time, we've seen thousands of people who've been put out of their homes because of this. And so right now, the city has owned about 40,000 abandoned homes that it just got because people were pushed out of their homes since they couldn't keep up with the taxes. So we've got thousands of homes across the city right now where people are basically like on pins and needles because they weren't able to pay the taxes, weren't able to pay their water bills, and are just waiting to see what's gonna happen next. The county's decided that, you know what, they're not gonna do anything anymore to even try and pretend that they're gonna help people. They recently sent out letters to about 120,000 homeowners and said, look, you've got until the end of December to figure out how you're gonna pay your taxes or you're out. What they've done just in the past couple of weeks is said, well, we're gonna extend this till May. But it's not even because they decided that they're gonna be benevolent. They can't manage the number of cases of people they're gonna have to put out. So we're talking about not only these massive water shutoffs, but massive homelessness tied to it. And again, let's be for real about this. Detroit is prime real estate. You know, we're on an international border. We've got land there that's surrounded by the river, and it's rich in just other sorts of resources there as well. And so while this is taking place, the city is saying, well, we've got all these houses that we now own, let's figure out what we're gonna do with them. So some of them, like Paula mentioned, that they just can't be repaired, so they're tearing them down with federal money, blight dollars. Other ones, they're putting thousands of dollars into them. They'll put up to $120,000, $140,000 into a home to repair it, and then sell it back for $60,000. But of course, people in Detroit can't afford any of these because you don't have that kind of income. The bank's not gonna give you a loan, and there's no way that you're gonna be able to get into any of those homes. So instead, you continue to have this situation where people born and raised in the city are being put out, new people are being invited to come into the city, and this massive gentrification that's happening is creating all kinds of tensions. There was a story in the newspaper just a couple of days ago about this 31-year-old who actually bought one of these homes through the auction from the county when they take possession of a home after the taxes are paid. He ended up getting the house for $500. But the person who lost the house is still living in the house because the city hasn't had a process for how to actually forcibly put people out. So now this person that just bought the house, seeing that this is a great opportunity, now has to deal with how am I going to get this person out of my house, you know? And this is a middle-aged African-American man. So you've got all kinds of things that are going on around this. And the story ends up being where, you know what, he doesn't know that he wants to have to deal with these sorts of things. You know, but people go into these situations almost like blind or ignorant, right? And determine that here's an opportunity for me to get some cheap Detroit real estate, come in and not really think about the lives that are being affected. And it's this thing that people are thinking it's okay to do because we keep thinking that if I don't look at it or pay enough attention to it, it won't really affect me. So as we see, as these cities keep losing their tax base, they're also trying to figure out, well, what are other ways that we can raise money? And so appreciating, again, like Dustin, what you were mentioning, and I'm thinking as soon as they extract all the coal they can out of here, these corporations will be gone. You know, they won't have any need anymore for West Virginia. And in many ways, it'll be like Detroit, right? The auto industries were very happy to have all the workers that they could there, build all these cars, and then when they sucked out all the profits, decided to move to other places like Mexico or Asia or maybe Canada, but Canada didn't play for it either.
No. And we pay for that.
Right, and
For them to go
exactly.
over there.
And so they leave, and what they leave behind is all of their waste, their environmental waste, all of the damages that they do, and all the tax credits, right? So they can come in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, not have to pay a dime for any of the infrastructure repairs, like the water pipes or the highways or anything.
right.
The residents are left with this, on top of all of the other kinds of city needs. And what do they start doing? The corporations say, well, let's take a look at what the city owns and figure out how we can make some money off of that. In fact, if you want, we'll take over your water department, we'll take over your electrical department, we'll take over all these units that you operate because we can do it more efficiently than the unions, right? That have been working as city workers.
Doing that.
And we can, right, and we can actually make this run more efficiently. Well, if we weren't, you know, as smart as we are and seen this in multiple cities, other cities tried this and they ended up reverting. Atlanta's one of the good examples of that, where they said, they bought into it, but the corporation said, you know, we'll be able to do this better and more efficient, and it's not true. That we're seeing right now this opportunity for corporations to come in at the municipal level, because it's easier to take on people who maybe don't understand as much about the laws and can actually have more effect at local levels than they can at the national level. And so these attacks on our communities are really making it so that we're fighting on these multiple fronts.
I want to turn your attention to the screen now because we actually have, I see Ohio just walked into the room, about that wonderful phrase, you cannot take down the master's house with the tools of the masters. And we've seen the way the masters have created a toolbox for us on which we have relied again and again and again. And guess what? The minute we start tearing down that house, we find out the master's not there. The master's living in the castle behind the house, okay? So Nancy is going to tell us about a struggle in California in which they are using a tool of the master, particularly a bill for the right to water, okay? And we're saying, okay, so then how are they going to get around this one? And we know they are, but that's not the point. The point is that in that struggle, we mobilize people, we educate people, we bring them into the movement. And so as we use these tools, we use them with the understanding of what they're good for and what they're not good for. And I'm thrilled that Nancy is going to be able to join us from California, because what she is going to propose is something that we should be considering as part of our strategy.
Well, first of all, it's been absolutely wonderful to to meet you all by screen. I've met Maureen and some of you when I was at the WILF Congress in Detroit and heard the wonderful panel that you put on the Friday night that we were there in August. And I have read the articles about West Virginia and the water spill and have supported the mountaintop removal, the anti-mountaintop removal campaigns. So my heart and my activism have been with both your communities over the years. And I not only worked on the human right to water bill here in California, but I helped drive Nestle bottled water out of a community at the foot of Mount Shasta in Northern California. And after that, however, the mayor of Sacramento, in an underhanded deal, brought them down and put them in a business park just a little bit east of Sacramento. And so now they're bottling not only municipal water, but they're driving spring water down from the Sierra foothills to bottle spring water there. So there you are. Sometimes it's complicated. I also have been a delegate to a number of the World Water Forums in Kyoto and Mexico City and in France, where the alternative people's water forums, where the People's Water Forum have presented alternatives to the World Water Forum, which is corporate run and government supported. So then one more sort of personal note. Here in Davis, California, where I live, the city council for at least 20 years has been trying to exercise their water right to bring Sacramento River water to our community and a neighboring community, claiming that our underground aquifer and our well system is compromised. So over the past couple of years, they finally accomplished that with a council vote. They established a joint powers authority between these two cities, and they accepted bids to build a new water treatment plant. And as many times as I went down to the city council to say a design, build, operate is privatization, the city council members would sit there and say, no, this is not privatization, it's just design, build, operate. And operation is not selling or leasing, it's just private operation. And I would repeatedly say and provide all the case studies that it in fact is privatization. We lost that campaign. We took it to a vote, a referendum, but we lost that. However, we did defeat their absolutely terrible water rate structure. So we at least have a now better water rate structure. We won by 51% of the vote, so it was a very slim victory, but we're proud of that victory. A large multinational is now running our water system. And I understand in Detroit that there is the suspicion that Veolia, being brought in as an advisor,
Right.
might be being positioned to take over your water system.
That's right.
Veolia was actually the first bidder on our project, but we raised such a ruckus about the reputation of Veolia and one other corporation whose name escapes me right at the moment, that they dropped out of the bidding, and we were left with C2MH Hill. So just on that note, it took us 4 years to finally get the Human Right to Water bill passed in 2012. We first worked as a coalition for the first 2 years, 2008 to 2010, and Governor Schwarzenegger was then persuaded to veto the bill. Then we reformed our groups. We developed a larger coalition called the Safe Water Alliance, and we brought in many more, we brought in religious, environmental, community activists, groups to really, create a broader coalition and to really educate people about human rights, not only about the issue of safe water and affordable water, but about human rights and why it was so critical in regard to the populations in California, which were poor farm worker, poor urban communities that had to rely on well water that in the Central Valley of California was contaminated with agricultural chemicals and nitrates. And on the fringes of urban water systems were polluted by local contamination, for example, perchlorate and other chemical contaminants. And so we had to bring this sort of urban and rural coalition together as well, and to make very clear how unacceptable it was that these communities who needed to use this water were suffering health consequences. Blue baby syndrome, terrible skin rashes, stomach and digestive problems, and in incipient cancers and other more serious diseases, impacts on diabetes, etc. So it was by sort of coordinating the health issues and the human right to water that we continue to sort of make good progress. I have to say that whereas this bill got through the major committees of the state assembly and the state senate, in 2011 it got hung up in the state appropriations committee. That's where bills go to die. Many of you may know that from your own experience. That bills go to die in the Senate Appropriations Committee, where anybody can simply put it on hold. It's on that committee, and it goes on hold, and it's left there. And then you have to launch another campaign to get it off hold. It took us a year, from 2011 to 2012, to get it off hold, and then work to not have it defeated in the Senate. And then when it went back to be correlated with the Assembly bill, because there were a few amendments made, to not have it be defeated then when it goes back for coordination. So that took us a year, and then as I say, in the summer of 2012, it was really touch and go. We had to go into offices, we had to lobby hard. I'm sure all you know how you have to work at the legislative level. And we really had to pull. We had many, we had terrific materials. Not only did we go into offices, but we had many rallies. And actually on the day it was voted on the floor of the state, of the Senate, excuse me, of the Assembly, many conservative members stood up and voted against this bill, saying that it was not necessary, that there was plenty of water, that this was, sort of going to be expensive, et cetera, et cetera. The water agencies and the agricultural industry were coming in to try to defeat this. Ultimately, with some other mobilization within the governor's office, we were then able to get him to sign this bill. So really, it took 4 years of ongoing meetings, ongoing campaigns, mobilization, workshops at every level of citizen groups to get this done. It took a visit by Katerina de Albuquerque, the United Nations Human Rights Rapporteur, to come to California and make her report the way she made a report in Detroit. It took her actually shaming the state and the state government. It took bringing in bottles of dirty water, as you were holding up there, to show what this water looked like when it came out of the tap and how unhealthy it was. We had private testing of that water to demonstrate its how unsafe it was. And we had to really make clear that this was not just complaints of the poor and the underserved and the marginalized and of farm workers and of people of color. We had to make it very clear that this was a human rights issue. And I think on that we began to succeed in finally getting the bill signed. That was very important. One thing I think we need to do is we still need to link the human right to water to the human right to health. Because the human right to health is guaranteed in many of the UN conventions. And it's not only in the Declaration of Human Rights, but it's actually in other human rights vehicles. So we need to link these two together so that we can move forward on a much broader front of human rights principles of the United Nations and bring that human rights analysis into the work we do as a much larger frame. I'd like to say that the other issue that came that now has to be dealt with is how do state agencies and departments begin to implement the this bill, AB 685, the human right to water. And that's a much more complicated process because it means they have to not only examine their own mandates and what their mandates mean in terms of specifics in implementing this human right in terms of their agency and department obligations, but then what part of their budget do they allocate to implement this in terms of their agency and department obligations. So to that effect, the UC Berkeley School of Law was engaged, their Human Rights Clinic was engaged to write an analysis of how that implementation, what that implementation would look like, what the guidelines should be, and how each of the agencies and departments would undertake that. So in the handout that Mary BJ will give you is a reference and the link to that UC Berkeley School of Law report, which is essential because not only does that report talk about state policy, but lifts up United Nations human rights policy and cites a lot of the human rights documents in order to make this bridge between state policy and international human rights policy. And I think that's extremely important. Thirdly, you may like to look at the Thirst for Justice video and show it to people in your communities that was made documenting this 4-year struggle to get the Human Right to Water bill passed in California. It's a terrific documentary. And it really lays out in the most dynamic way through the voices of the impacted communities and through the activist community what it took to do this. And it's really quite thrilling to look at and see what this kind of real effort on the ground can accomplish. I grant you that this was not a struggle of the kind of dimension that you are struggling for in Detroit. My heart goes out to you in Detroit for what you're really faced with there, with both a state and a local city complicity with the corporate structures to really challenge all of your rights: right for housing, right for water, right to health, right to decent and fair jobs. So it's a huge undertaking that you're faced with. I think that what has been raised here really is what is the framework that we begin to roll out, sort of use to really frame what all these separate struggles are. And it's been touched on repeatedly by every one of you. It is the framework of corporate rights versus the rights of people and the rights of communities and the rights of nature, I might say.
That's right.
And I think if we keep telling our stories and linking our stories together and then try to create a frame that then links them in such a way that the issue of capitalism and the issue of the system joins us together in an ever larger circle of people to really combat, which we can't do alone in our communities. We have to build a movement of movements. So I just wanted to say that actually this struggle, as Mary BJ was saying, goes back to the end of World War II when the United Nations was founded and human rights were lifted up. But as we know, by the 1960s, with the anti-war movement and the environmental movement and the civil rights movement, the accomplishments then in the 60s were immediately then countered in the 70s. And it's very important to realize that when Martin Luther King wrote his wonderful speech in 1967, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, that he was actually going from his civil rights commitments to a critique of capitalism.
That's right. That's right.
And he raised up the triple evil of materialism, racism, and militarism. And that's actually what we're facing today, including linking materialism to the capitalist system. The memo of Lewis Powell that went to the states, to this U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in which he lays out the entire corporate takeover agenda. Courts, education, public services, you name it, the whole spectrum of what we now see as the corporate takeover. And systematically, that has been done. And in 1973, Nixon created Fast Track as a way to ram through international trade agreements. Our communities with the provisions in the trade agreements. And one of those provisions is privatization. And one of those provisions is the corporate takeover of water, and of the commons, of the public commons, which was referred to. And this will be it will be a crisis in all our communities if we allow the TPP and the European Union U.S. Free Trade Agreement to pass. So we have to see also the linkage of what we're facing in our communities to the trade agreement regime and to defeating Fast Track, so we can defeat these two agreements. Because in particular, these agreements are going to impact jobs more. They're going to impact our economy more. They're going to have enormous impacts on accelerating dirty energy, the extractive energy system in all of our communities, fracking, mountaintop removal, dirty coal, more nuclear, more oil train bombs. So the extractive community is coming out of the third world countries to rest in our own communities now. And we have to make common cause with across the globe in fighting back this corporatized global trade system, as well as the system within our communities that we see taking hold by all sorts of different measures. In 1997 or 8, Ronnie Thugger, who founded the Alliance for Democracy, which I co-chair, and an agriculture activist, stood in front of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia and read their declarations of independence from corporate rule. And I think we really have to take up this challenge of enunciating what our vision of democracy is versus the corporate vision of corporatocracy, which is not democracy for we the people. It has to do, of course, with this whole issue of money in politics and corporate personhood and what Move to Amend is doing on the 28th Amendment to deny corporations personhood and that money is speech. That's one movement. There's a movement on water. There's a movement on climate. But how do we bring these movements together to build a movement of movements along with the civil rights and racial justice movement as well? So I think we need to really look at how we can build across issues and across silos now to really build a huge pushback. So I'd like to offer just one more suggestion, is that as we tell our stories, maybe in our communities we can set up tribunal systems where actually we not only tell the stories, because every one of the stories that was told here had evidence built into the story, but that we pull out the evidence and we create a tribunal system where the evidence is presented as documents for the harm, and we pass sort of like a citizen's court judgment